Hello Vulkan developers! Today we're going to take a look at synchronization again. We have previously used the synchronization API to solve two main problems. One is to handle image layout transitions, and the second is to synchronize the access to an image when it is accessed in multiple rendering passes. For example, in tutorial 28, we had a compute shader generate an image, and then a fragment shader was used to copy the image to the frame buffer to be displayed in the window. However, this synchronization API is now a bit too old, so the powers that be decided to replace it with the new API with a very creative name, Synchronization2. The main job of the new API is to solve a granularity problem with the way that vkCmdPipelineBarrier operates. Let's do a quick recap of this function. It takes a command buffer handle and the source and destination stage masks. These guys tell Vulkan the 2 points in the pipeline that need to be synchronized. For example, one fragment shader needs to wait for another, or a compute shader may need to wait for a fragment shader, and etc. In addition, we have some dependency flags and potentially 3 sets of barriers: memory, buffer, and image. In this video, we will focus on image barriers, so let's see the structure vkImageMemoryBarrier. Here, we have the source and destination access masks. These flags specify what type of action the 2 points in the pipeline are engaged in. For example, we may have a read after write dependency or a write after write. We also have the old and new layouts for layout transitions, the source and destination queue family indices. This is to allow ownership to be transferred between queues, and finally, the image itself and the sub-resource structure. This allows us to pinpoint a specific part of the image instead of the entire image. The problem is that the source and destination stage masks are specified in the API level, while the image and the access masks are specified at the level of the image barrier structure. This means that if we need to synchronize 2 images at 2 different pipeline locations, we basically have 2 options. We can submit a single vkCmdPipelineBarrier call for the 2 images and combine the stage masks using a bitwise OR of the 2 stage bits, or we can submit one barrier call for each image with its specific stage mask. Both options are bad for performance. The first one causes an unnecessary stall for one of the images that now needs to wait for the stage that was specified for the other. The second option is bad because when the barriers are specified separately, it severely limits Vulkan's ability to optimize them. Now, in simple pipelines, you may not even notice any performance change between the old and the new APIs, but going forward, you should definitely upgrade your source code and start using the new version. So now we have vkCmdPipelineBarrier 2. The 10 parameters in the previous version were replaced by just 2. The command buffer handle and the address of a new dependency structure called dependency info. This structure contains the same dependency flags and the 3 sets of barriers: memory, buffer, and image. However, these are not the same as the old ones. Instead, we have memory barrier 2, buffer memory barrier 2, and image memory barrier 2. If we compare the 2 versions of this last one, we can see that the new structure is mostly the same, with a couple of changes. First, the stage masks were moved from the API level down to the barrier. This solves the original problem because now we can have the specific stage that each barrier needs, along with the access mask and, of course, the image. Remember that the dependency info structure allows multiple image memory barriers to be specified, so we can easily batch barriers together in the same function call. Also notice that both the stage and access masks now have a new version. The VK pipeline stage flags 2 are now a type def of an unsigned 64-bit integer, whereas previously it was just 32 bits. This allows us to have much more granular control of the pipeline with a lot more new stages compared to the old API. Same thing with the access mask. This guy also switched from 32 to 64 bits, allowing a ton of new pipeline action types. Now that we understand how the API works, let's see an example. In this demo, we have a lighting pass which creates the image, and then a compute pass which creates a grayscale post-processing effect. You can basically replace the compute shader code and create other effects, but this one is simple enough for this demo. Before we start using the Synchronization2 API, we have to enable it on the logical device. This depends on the version of the Vulkan physical device that we are using. The new API became a core part of Vulkan 1.3, so if this is the case, then we just need to set the Synchronization2 flag in the physical device Vulkan 1.3 feature structure to true. Notice how this works. The pNext pointer in the device create info structure is set to be the address of the physical device Vulkan 1.2 feature structure. The pNext pointer of this guy is set to be the address of features 1.3, and this one contains the flag that we need to enable. However, if we are on a 1.2 instance, then we have a bit more work to do. The pNext pointer of the features 1.2 structure is set to be the address of a physical device Synchronization2 features KHR structure. This guy contains the same flag that we need to enable. Now we also need dynamic rendering, so the pNext pointer here is set to be the address of a physical device dynamic rendering features KHR structure, and we enable it as usual. But we also need to specify Synchronization2 as an extension. So we push a macro which is provided by the Vulkan headers to the extension vector. This macro is defined to be the name of the extension. The extension vector is passed along to the device create info structure. Next up, we have the new version of the barrier function. We've been using a wrapper called ImageMemBarrier, which takes the command buffer, the image handle and its parameters, format, layer count, MIP levels and base MIP levels, and also the old and new layouts. Based on those two layouts, we set the access masks in the barrier structure and the stage masks to be used when calling vkCmdPipelineBarrier. The new wrapper is called, not surprising, ImageMemBarrier2. It has the exact same interface, which makes it easier to replace the calls to the old function. This guy works very similar to the previous one. The only change is that we are setting both the access and stage masks directly into the new barrier structure. At the end of the function, we create a VK dependency info structure, which is mostly empty, except for the pointer to the single barrier that we have here, and the number of barriers, which is 1. Finally, we call CMDPipelineBarrier2, passing in the address of the dependency structure. All the usages of ImageMemBarrier2 are in the function that records the command buffers. This function takes an index of the object that we want to render, the lighting mode, which is a push constant parameter to the shader, and a vector of command buffers, one per swap chain image, to record into. The function is called from a wrapper, which goes over all the models that have been loaded and over all the available lighting modes. For every command buffer, we need to call begin command buffer and then transition the swap chain image into color attachment optimal. If this is the first mesh, then the source layout is undefined. Otherwise, it is already color attachment optimal, and we are basically doing a transition from the same layout to itself. It may seem like we can drop the transition in this case, but this will be incorrect. Every primary command buffer must establish the layout before it starts executing, even if it looks like the layout is already known. A single layout transition would have been possible if all the meshes would have been recorded into the same command buffer. This design is also valid. The advantage of a per mesh command buffer approach is that it allows us to call the object entirely by simply not submitting its command buffer for execution. After the layout transition, we call the begin rendering wrapper. We bind the pipeline and the descriptor sets of the model. We record the rendering of the specific model into the command buffer, and finally, we call vkCmdPipelineBarrier. These innocent 4 lines actually hide quite a bit of logic which has already been covered in previous videos, so I suggest watching them for more details. This completes the lighting pass. If this is the last mesh in the list, then we also want to record the post-processing compute shader effect. Notice that in this demo, both rendering passes are actually working directly on the swap chain image. This is not very efficient, and we should probably render into an offline image, but it makes the code much easier to understand. So we start by transitioning the swap chain image from color attachment optimal to layout general. This is the only way in which the compute pipeline can work on the swap chain. Next, we calculate the number of workgroups that we need for the compute shader. Each local group of the compute shader processes a square of 16 by 16 pixels, so we round up the window dimensions and divide by 16. We can now record the execution of the compute shader into the command buffer. This was also covered in a previous video. Finally, we transition the swap chain image from layout general to layout present. If everything is working correctly, we have a nice grayscale effect. As you can see, I can actually enable and disable the effect using the GUI. In the code that we saw, the post-processing effect was hard-coded into the command buffer, so controlling it from the GUI requires a more complex implementation. But I wanted to make this as simple as possible. You can find the complete implementation in my Git repo. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.